Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We're very excited here from Vjal to reach you once again. I'm Mark Troy, the host for this week. As always, joined by Adi Burlia, founder of the AI Institute, Vjal Institute. Welcome, Adi. How are you?
Mark, always a pleasure to do this, and it's been another great week in AI. Lots and lots of updates, and the world keeps changing.
Great. Well, before we get to that, reminder to everybody for joining us. If you want more information, always please go to our website, Vjal, vjal.ai, or email us at outreach@vjal.ai. But Adi, let's jump into it. As always, you've got three great stories for us this week. Let's start with number one. You said you've got some info about the new launches from Google and Microsoft. What have they dropped and why does it matter?
So, we had Google I/O, which is much bigger than AI, at least for Google. It covers a lot, but then AI naturally took center stage. You had some great statements by people all across the Google ecosystem, but of course from the top guys themselves. Constantly, even while they're talking about Android, even when they're talking about cloud, they're having to sort of think through how AI sort of puts into it. And at the same time, they dropped some of their latest models, the new 3.5, lots of feedback coming on that. And then Microsoft AI in the same time period took out its first attempt at a full suite of state-of-the-art models. Now, if you recall, Microsoft was very good at creating their own models on the small scale, the Microsoft 5 series, but these models are quite decent. And in fact, their claim is, and in my few tests show that the image model, of course, is reaching or has exceeded the SOTA levels and just behind ChatGPT, but they are on par or just behind, perhaps 3 months ago, 4 months ago, and so it's expected a leap. The big thing and the key takeaway from these two updates is that you have the traditional guys, Microsoft and Google, who own the distribution, particularly for enterprise, particularly for customers when it comes to email, software, cloud, and all of this. And they're now really now in the full running of pushing through their own models and not just coming out and saying, okay, we have to do now in the case of Microsoft, OpenAI, and Claude. The big takeaway for Microsoft, these models are trained from scratch. So they're not, deep seek distilled or they've taken existing models and sort of put it in. They've really gone back and said from the very start of the training data till the end, we're going to own the entire space. That I think is more remarkable than just the numbers on the screen because that's going to enable them to sort of take the next leap much faster. Having access to proprietary harnesses into Microsoft Office, we can really now see, particularly for all of those who have been waiting that, hey, Claude Code or Claude does a great job in Office, having native Microsoft models with full access to the harnesses. This is what we've been waiting for. And so we're going to
Yeah.
see this come out in the Google Workspaces. You've already seen Gmail start to show some of this, and now we're seeing that happening in Microsoft. So for consumers and small businesses and enterprise who are using these tools, it's sort of that moment where I think we're now seeing that final push into everyday use of AI consistently.
It's interesting too, because it seemed early on that Microsoft's full strategy was just to be completely aligned with OpenAI, ChatGPT. Now it looks like they're also having their own strategy just to make sure they're not completely reliant on one solution.
Yeah, and it helps their stock price, right? They can't be seen as a company, and Microsoft has historically invested billions and billions of dollars in AI, and
Mm.
Satya Nadella was always credited for being able to quickly pivot and jump into the new stuff, even while they were still investing in their own systems. But it's
Mm.
nice to see them finally come out with this, and it's really interesting to see how they integrate it with their products because I think that's what people are really waiting for.
Great. Well, let's get to our second story, Adi. Something happened overnight, I guess yesterday, the Great American AI Act. What does that
Yeah,
mean? Is it good or bad?
let me load that in for you, right? So you have the new act, and it's being billed as a bipartisan act by a bunch of lawmakers who have sort of pushed this in. You have the Trump administration taking a very, very open view of AI, and
Yeah.
particularly being at odds with Europe, and that sort of kickstarted one huge innovation stream as sort of regulations. The way Europe was thinking of it took a back seat, and you had, okay, we're going to do the Wild West frontier and compete with China. But primarily, this act has, a full ambition to be comprehensive, right? So it's not just a small regulatory act, and it just came out, but I can walk you through three, four aspects which I thought were very interesting. First, of course, it explicitly states in their goal is to that have a federal act that supersedes state acts. We've had places like California try to come up with their own with other states. And, this would be very, very, difficult if you had every state coming out with its own AI systems and their own AI regulations. So the idea is to supersede this at the federal level, but also to be comprehensive. It does have very different regulations for companies who are large, $500 million dollars in turnover and above versus smaller labs. So it's a little bit nuanced. And so it's nice to see that come in as well. But it also looks at comprehensive reforms and as well as pushing for AI education and transition of people who are sort of left behind. That said, the initial reactions have been mixed. The tech industry does see this as a forward-looking act, though, once they go to the fine print, I think some of them might have a little bit of an issue. Obviously, worker unions across the board are not very happy. Many of them have come out, although there are provisions for them. It does make AI acceptable. And that sort of enables it to go into every facet of the federal government as well as society at large. Watch this space. This is going to take months of negotiations. I think you're going to have a lot of lobby groups come in and try to push and pull to get either their favorite issues resolved or take out some of the more heavy-handed language that may have made it into the bill. But it's good to see that we are getting comprehensive regulatory reform all across the world, and America has been considered one of the standard bearers in sort of balancing it right so far. So let's see what happens. I mean, space to watch. We'll probably check back in a month's time to see if it's still alive or how is the new conversations shaping up around this.
Yeah, super complicated. You have some lawmakers wanting to pass laws to basically ban states from passing their own laws because they don't want to hold back American corporations. You have other lawmakers that want to protect jobs and want to pass laws to kind of restrain AI a little bit. And you have other lawmakers that are worried about the security implications and, AI, IT security, but also state security, national security. So really complex, huh?
Very complex, Mark. And I've always said from day one that part of the AI rollout across the world is renegotiating the fundamental social contract. Now, this doesn't go as far, nor should it, but at least we have some thoughts being emerged where they are a little bit more sophisticated than what we saw maybe 2 years ago, which was ban all AI or enable all AI or that kind of extreme language that we saw coming out. This does seem to be a more nuanced approach, slowly by slowly.
I agree. Interesting. Well, speaking of people not liking AI, we saw the past few weeks commencement speakers getting booed at universities when they mention AI, and now there's some debate going on about AI being used for artists and for paintings such as Monet's. What can you tell me about this?
And you had Ron Shang, who had this, Harvard thing where he basically made this amazing joke about, Terminator Judgment Day and AI, and I thought it was very well executed. And his joke was, your entire job as your generation is to kill AI because there's going to come over, and then you have to get a Terminator to come back and save us all. A well done joke, but certainly I think captures the mood where you have young people at least who are starting to see the economic impact of this being very high. At Vjal, one of the things we do is that we are a social impact company, and everything we do is free for college kids, free for school kids, because we're seeing it. Experts get 7 to 9x productivity within 90 days of getting a coaching or a training program done. Young people struggle 30, 40%, which is great, but certainly not something that's going to make you stand out compared to your peers. And certainly companies around the world, including our clients, have started doing hiring freezes. I think this was a great example, of a test. And credit to this account, Shloms, and of course, Jedi Wolf will sort of put this together as well. And they ran a test, which is a very basic, and I saw it go up. So it came on my feed when it went up, and I'm like, this is going to end really badly. And they put a real Monet painting and said, hey, here's the assumption that it's AI. Describe why is it inferior? And this is just a subselection of comments all across. But, pretty much as expected, you had casuals and critics, etc., go after it and tell why it was so bad and it was, not a real Monet when it was actually a real Monet. And
Yeah.
for me, that came out with two very interesting intersections. One, I think a critique of the art world in general. I've always maintained that less important to most people is the art and more important is the story behind the art, but then also to where we are today with AI. And I think more and more, apart from a backlash where people want things that are authentic, that are genuine, that are I've been trying to get the term human crafted. Now put this as certified human crafted or 50% human crafted in. But the kind of both the backlash that it faced, but also the lack of nuance and understanding of what a Monet is, I think was remarkably telling of where people stand on AI. But, much of it is anger. And I think many artists feel that, either their work went into training data or quite frankly, the AI competition is unfair and doesn't reflect, their art or their reality or who they are. So it remains to be seen. I think you'll have a wide variety of consumers who, just as when graphics came out first, I remember, painters saying that mouse-given graphic art wasn't real art. And we kind of got over that hump, and now they're considered graphic artists. And then you'll have AI artists and AI assisted artists, but this is a very, very emotional and political sensitive situation right now on which side you fall. And it's going to see, in the next couple of years, going back to our earlier comment about, the AI bill, you're going to see many countries and communities and societies have to find, where they land on human expression and creativity, as well as AI's place in it.
Yeah, complicated situation. Thank you, Adi. Well, look, I know you have a great demo for us today, and it has to do also with making images, I think. So,
I'm going to do actually sound today, and this is one of the new Google models. And it always sort of surprises me, how we have these amazing tools and people are still not able to use them as well. And so this is the Google AI Studio, and I'm using their latest launch, since we talked about it briefly, model, the 3.1 Flash Preview. And of course, here you have a great ability to deep dive down on settings. And I've just taken a very happy, neutral pace voice with a nice British accent, and, pick one of the many voices, a little bit, basic instructions on how it should sound. I fed a scene in, give it a sample context. And here's like a less than a minute story about Tracy and her, journey with AI. And what I'm going to do right now is just try to, so I ran this earlier, so we don't have to wait for it to play. And I want you to see if we can do this. And there we go.
Tracy was 6 and she loved purple crayons, pancakes, and questions. One rainy morning, her dad showed her AI. It learns from examples, he said. It can help, but it can also guess wrong. At school, Tracy made BraveBot, an AI that helped kids take one small, brave step. When someone felt scared to read, BraveBot said, "Take one breath. Try the first sentence." But when Noah made a math mistake, BraveBot said mistakes were bad. Tracy frowned. That's not kind. She added a better rule. Mistakes are how brains practice. BraveBot tried again. Mistakes help you learn. Find one step you understand, then ask for help. Noah smiled. That night, Tracy told her cat Pickle, "AI is like a lantern. It helps us see ahead. But people must hold the light carefully."
Now, apart from that delightful end, one of the nice parts is that you have these tags which allow you to really customize and figure out how you want the voice and expressions. And obviously, you can have multiple voices and systems really recreate a thing. I thought that sounded really nice. It is one of the top models. There's a lot of new models that have come out as well. But I think people should now start thinking about how to integrate this both in their lives for fun like this, but then also businesses, particularly which have a lot of audio components, podcasts, audiobooks, and even just basic, industry voiceover. So a big leap ahead, I think, in voice and a lot of customization. So please try it out. A lot of fun.
Very cool. I'm going to download that to use as a narration on some of my presentations and slideshows I do. Very cool. Thank you.
Sorry for the interruption, Mark. The only thing I'll tell people is it's way customizable. So you want to spend a little bit of time getting the voice, the settings, the warmth, the speed. Everyone has a different thing that they really love. This is the voice that I really want. So that customization can work against you as well, because it does take half an hour, 1 hour until you find that voice that is uniquely you. Save the settings. I definitely built a bunch of voices and then forgot to save. I said, oh no, all that stuff has to come in, but it's pretty good.
Okay, so look, each week you share a great success story of one of your customers or somebody that Vjal has helped counsel. Tell me the story for this week. What have you got?
I have a great one. So this was for me. I always love when you have a story where it's about growth rather than, hey, we saved money or save time, because that's what we really want people to use AI for growth. And so we've been working with a lot of family offices and investment funds. And one of the big ones that we've been working with, they are highly regulated. So they started like at 100 million AUM, and they sort of pushed up to their next fund, which is about 500 million. Now, what this fund offers, particularly to family offices, is a very tight investment thesis, right? So, you have funds which are a little bit more black box. Hey, we do everything. We go here, we go there. But there's this, look, we're going to take a very tight, risk-adjusted in a thesis, and we're going to run it against a bunch of public market stocks. In practice, what that means is what they've committed to their clients is that they choose about 32 stocks, which they constantly invest and monitor every day. And then you have the investment theses plus their client's own sort of layered on top. Now, when they were doing 100 million, this was a 2-3 member team. Had one research person, you had the investment people, you had one of the compliance people trying to look at this there. And as they go to 500 million and they're trying to hit 2 billion, the number of clients, the number of investment theses, the number of compliance checks on the stocks tried to go vary. One of the beautiful things we were able to do with them is, one is a custom tracker. They have all the 32 stocks. Every new story that comes in gets pulled in. Their own researchers also keep adding to it, so they have consistent checks. But they have the audit checker run against the investment thesis and against each stock, against each client. Now, that was new, where they're able to sort of say, are we still within the zone? Has this stock moved out or drifted from the investment thesis? And for them, it's a big liability issue, because that's their promise, is that, hey, we have these other stocks which we will sort of pull in, and we'll pull these out if they move from our compliant investment window. And now they have a system that does that almost every 6 hours. Now, if you ask me, 6 hours is overkill, but I think everybody's happier that they get 3 or 4 checks per day on the intra trading. And I thought that was a very nice, simple use case. Took a couple of days to build out and to run through. And they would have had to hire at least 1 or 2 people to kind of manage this and do this, or a full professional firm. And now they just have an autonomous agent that goes in and just checks and raises red flags if something happened. And this allowed them to grow with the same team without having to add more overhead, more compliance, more research to 5-10x their size. And that's for me, that's the promise of AI, being able to do a lot more with a lot less.
Very interesting. Thanks, Adi, for sharing. Look, everybody, thanks for joining us once again. Reminder, the Vjal Institute, we have over 400 certified trainers around the world. We offer in-person trainings for C-suite, for your teams. We also have a 10-week coaching program that'll take your employees from 0 to proficient in just 10 weeks. Reach out to us at vjal.ai or outreach@vjal.ai. Adi, thanks for joining me. See you next week.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Please check out my monthly State of the AI updates as well, and join us next week for another exciting edition where we recap everything that's happened.
Thanks, Adi. Bye-bye.